Hello, good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing fine this morning. I'm here with Ricardo above me, just there on the top.
Hello Maurice. Hello everybody.
The idea of this webinar this morning is to, first of all, if you have comments, questions, if something doesn't sound right, please make comments and we will try to adjust as good as possible or as well as possible. And so the idea of this webinar is to explain you and to show you a little bit how easy it is to connect Anubis in different environments. The first idea is to explain you a little bit the concept of it. So you will see here on my right side um, a PowerPoint with just a few pages. Sorry, the other way, like this, whatever. A few pages that will explain how to connect Anubis because it's nothing complicated. It's pretty much straightforward. And in a point-to-point environment, then we're going to do it in a networked environment to show you the principles and the advantages so that it's scalable also. The idea is that you can start with something very simple, very basic, and extend it when needed. And then explain the technicity of it. So obviously we are able to connect it in both worlds, in the Mac world and the PC world. I'm going to show you the PC world on the Azure side, and Ricardo is going to show you the Mac world on the core audio side. And obviously, as things evolve and as those two structures or S have two different architectures, there are also things that are possible in one and not the other, and vice versa. And we are coming up at the end of this presentation. We will show you that we're coming up with a new driver or new virtual sound card, basically, that can emulate, so to say, what core audio does on the Mac side. So we try to reach as much as possible um, both all possibilities on both architectures. So on the Windows side as well as on the Mac side, as much as possible, as much as we can. Great. And at the end, we're going to show you a tiny bit of ANEMAN also, which is basically our virtual patch bay to connect Anubis to our computer, and then obviously over the network as well, so that we can make some more complex situations, but we try to keep it as simple as possible. Great. So on the PowerPoint, you see first of all here the point-to-point connection. So it is very straightforward. It's one cable connected from the Anubis to the computer. And this will be, to start with, the basic configuration so that you will benefit from the analog IOs of the Anubis, of the mixer, of the monitoring devices. And obviously, this is to show you the scale why we at Merging have chosen to use an Ethernet cable rather than something else. Because obviously, you can carry a huge amount of data through 1 gigabit Ethernet cable. So in 1FS meaning 44.1 kilohertz or 48 kilohertz, you can carry something like more than 400 channels in bidirectional. But that means if you go higher in sample rate, as this is what we do, you share it by two. So it will mean more than 200 channels in 96K and so on and so on. Up to DSD, where you can carry 48 channels or even 60, bit more than 64 channels in DSD in one cable. And that makes it a very interesting solution for big track counts in high sample rates. Obviously, Anubis is not managing 410 channels. There wouldn't be any, any first of all, physical possibility in such a device. So obviously, you will have to make some choices in the channels you want to hear about those 410 channels. Great. So this is the concept of the point-to-point connection. So you have one cable, you connect it to your laptop or your computer or whatever via RJ45. It needs to be a Cat5e or a Cat6 cable, and you connect it to your Anubis. And for those who have perhaps read that Anubis has also a power over Ethernet possibility, so for that you need a switch, and that would add then a second device in between. So if it's a straight connecting one point to point from a computer to the Anubis, obviously then you will need to have the DC input to be able to power up the device. Great. Ricardo, you want to add something, or I can move to the second page?
I think you can move to the second point. I think you can. To be clear, Anubis what you were saying about the multiple channel, Anubis does have 256 I/O, and the built-in mixer can mix down 128 if you can count like crossfade. So that's why the double, we split the count by half. So that's why Anubis has actually 128 channels of Ravenna that can go in and out through the mixer and be mixed within the device itself. And then, as you say, upon all those channels, you can decide which one of those inputs you want to monitor at any time.
Obviously, this point-to-point connection allows me only to have two devices, one computer and one Anubis. And as soon as you want to add a third device or plus 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 devices, then you need a switch. And I'm not going to enter in detail about the switch, but it has to be a what's so-called a managed switch. And this managed switch has a certain types of protocols in there that we provide some very basic standard switches like Cisco and other that we recommend. And you can download the config file so that your Cisco switch is, so to say, ready to be used in the audio over IP 67 Ravenna type of environment. And the switch suddenly, but this you can do obviously at a later stage, to add the switch because you have a bigger production, and then you can connect different computers to it. So you benefit from different computers to the audio quality of Anubis, to the IOs, to the monitoring capabilities, to the mixer, and so on. And at the same time, obviously, you can extend your IOs via this switch as well. So you could extend it via some merging devices that you see on the left on the little picture in this rack. So Horus and Happy and so on. But you're totally open to also work with other manufacturers because perhaps you have them already, or perhaps because simply they fit in a different budget, scale, or whatever is required depending on the production and whatever you need. So you can really mismatch this type of manufacturers as long as they are AS, as you see it above network AS67, as long as they are AS67 compatible. And I put this focus right here because it is compatible on that aspect, so that you can really scale it and open it the way you want, depending on your project size, your budget, or whatever is required for your production. Now, one thing perhaps to be said, which is a bit crucial and important, nevertheless, is that when you go onto the AS67 Dante domain, then you are limited in 1FS. So you're limited to 44.1 or 48 kilohertz. This is a bit a bottleneck at the moment. This might evolve at one point. But what is also very interesting is that you see I put a Mac computer and this laptop, whatever that is undefined on the top. That could be a Windows computer. That means that all of them have access to all the in and outputs and all the advantages of all these devices. So if I go back to the Anubis, that means that my Mac would have the capability to be monitored via the Anubis, and at the same time, my laptop on the top as well. And even the streams coming from my Focusrite will also have the benefit of being monitored or summed in my Anubis, for example. So it is suddenly a complete open possibility on that. Nevertheless, to now go a bit more in the functionality and start simple again, we need obviously what we call a virtual sound card or driver to be able to connect the computer to the Anubis over the network. Before going there, Ricardo, do you have something to add?
I just wanted to say, in terms of the switch that we have recommended switch that we certify that they can run properly for long runs on Ravenna AES67, and those recommended switch we have on our Confluence database, knowledge database, have configuration files. So once you load them, we can guarantee yourself that you're gonna be able to work in such great I/O counts. And also we can provide support because there's so many switch around the world that it's nearly impossible to know. And one last thing to say is that if you have an Anubis, you should consider one of the switch we recommend, which is the Cisco with the PoE, so power over Ethernet. So it means that you can power up your Anubis simply from the network CAT cable RG45, and that's great. Not only to be 100 meters, if your Anubis is 100 meters from the switch and can be in an attic or something like that, but it's also great if your Anubis is a few centimeters away on your desk, because it removes potential ground looping things that you could have in your wiring in your studio. So I highly recommend switch like the Cisco we have
And it's one
3.
cable less.
It's one cable less. And it's redundancy, so you can have both also if you have important things. So PoE is actually a pretty good thing in the studio.
Good.
Go ahead.
So the thing is, I'm going to the next page, and you will see here that we basically aligned both windows of both virtual sound cards, how they look like. On the left side is the core audio, so the Mac sound card, and on the right side is the ASIO. Basically, the functionalities and the possibilities are more or less the same. Now, the very important thing to understand and to see is that the behavior of those sound cards, of those virtual sound cards, are different when you go higher in sample rate. This is due to the architecture of the OS. So we can't do anything about this. This is how it is. Now, the interesting thing is that obviously, depending on what type of work you're going to do, uh, obviously people want to do higher than 4FS, they will have to go onto the PC side, to the Azure side. And if you want to make very high track counts, even in 2FS and 4FS, then you much rather go to the Mac world. So this is then not even not dependent on the DAW. This is really dependent on the architecture of the system, of the operating system. So on the left side, we have actually two drivers. We have the normal VAD driver that is free of charge, that everybody can download, and that has some limitations. Basically, it's 1FS and 2FS. Sorry, it's 1FS in 44.1 and 48K, excuse me, and it has 64 in and outputs. But this is the limitation, that all the rest in the premium VAD that you see here now, the specs on the left side, has the same functionality in both cases, just this has 128 in and outputs, and it can go up to 192 kilohertz on that aspect. And you see that at basically on the drivers, we will open them afterwards. Ricardo will do that on the Mac side and explain the functionalities, and I will do that on the PC side and explain the functionalities. But basically, the main thing in here is that you set up which network card you want to use. Actually, where is your Anubis connected? Okay, because some people might have several cards with extenders or whatever. Or converters from USB-C to Ethernet and this type of things. So this is where you select which connector or which RG45 connector basically you use to connect your Anubis. And then you can also select the amount of in and outputs you allow this driver, this virtual sound card, to handle. This is basically bandwidth management. If you have just a point-to-point connection, you don't really care. But when you start to have bigger amounts of network, you might limit it, because if you then multicast it, this will multiply many amounts of channels, and the switches might suffer when you come to certain extremes. And these two functionalities exist in the Azure world, in the PC world, and in the Mac world. Great. And you see 128 I/O in 1FS for both cases. And when you go higher in sample rate on the Ravenna core audio side on the Mac world, it's 128 I/Os in 192K. Obviously, you need a workstation that supports that can handle this. And on the right side, you would only have 32 I/Os in 192K, but you can go much higher in sample rate, up to 16 I/O in DSD 256 or 16 I/O in PCM 384 kilohertz on that aspect. I'm going to move to the next page, unless Ricardo has something to add.
I would just say put the IO count in the panel that you are using. Don't go above the IO count that you're using, because you will just take bandwidth, unnecessary bandwidth that is reserved at that point. So if you have an Anubis, check the sampling rate to which you will work with, let's say, the 4 physical inputs. Then you put according to the table on the, let's say, as your side, you select the IO you want, and on the VAD you could put 8 in, 8 out, by example, with an Anubis or something like that. But you would not need to put 32 for nothing. It would just
Obviously, there's no
restrict it.
reason. Yeah,
Yeah.
good. So obviously that opens you the world to all DAW. You use your favorite DAW either on a Mac or on a PC. They will all, sorry, they will all be compatible with ASIO. I just listed a few here, but obviously there are many more, and you're basically free of whatever you want to use in your application. And this is perhaps one interesting thing to look at is that you obviously can work with different workstations because you prefer that one for the recording and that one for the editing or the type of job, or you're doing some more pop music work and then the next day you do some post production, and obviously you might use another workstation for one or the other. And you have this freedom totally, and they all can have access to those core audio as your driver. Perhaps one thing to be said, which is interesting, if you look at the old, let's say old because it exists since a while, this combination, but many people have started many years back with a Logic Pro Tools combination. So the interesting thing is that one could think that you run actually both DAWs on two computers, and you can actually feed, if the drivers, if the virtual sound cards are installed on both computers with an Anubis, you can actually feed some multitrack from the Logic to the Pro Tools so that you don't use the summing in the Logic. You have it in the Pro Tools, you use your Pro Tools to do that, or you sum in the Anubis to send it back to the Pro Tools. So this makes a very neat, nice solution in terms of a music production possibility. Good. Ricardo, something to add, or can I move to the next one?
You can move ahead.
This we're gonna show also in a second. This is basically it's called ANEMAN. That stands for Audio Network Manager. It's basically our virtual patch, and this has a specific installer in the Mac world as well, and in the PC world or the Windows 10 world. This is basically, and I'm going to show you, but just to briefly explain, you have your devices here, and as soon as you select your devices, you will have the in and outputs showing up on the right side. And then basically you connect them. Uh, and obviously, when you have a point-to-point device, like we showed here on the very first page, you will make one for all your connections and you will not open it again because those connections are done. But as soon as you have several devices, then it becomes very useful because you then can change, oh, today I use my Focusrite as an input, and the next day I use my Happy or my Horus as an input, or as an output, vice versa, of course, the way you want it. And today I'm going to work, the Studio A is going to work with the Anubis, and the Studio B is going to work with something else, with just straightforward converters. So this gives you the flexibility, and obviously you see it down here, it is also open to other manufacturers who have made their little plugin so that those manufacturers have devices that are as well visible on this platform, on this ANEMAN. Great. I'm gonna open the driver unless Ricardo has something to say.
Well, I like the fact that you started saying that ANEMAN is like a virtual driver. It's a virtual patch. I mean, it's like a patch bay, super advanced, that can tell you what's the status of your devices everywhere. So it's a bit like in the studio, you have your physical hardware here. You have your system, your PC or your Mac. With Ravenna in this audio over IP world, you connect both together, but you have to patch them to decide which interface goes with which drivers and stuff like that. So it's super advanced because it gives you also the advantage that one day you get a second Anubis and another merging device, and you can, with this ANEMAN the ANEMAN, you can connect either both through this system or a system that's remotely somewhere on the network, or you can interconnect them in between them, or sends in inputs from one device to the outputs on another device. So it's actually like a virtual advanced patch bay that does not restrain you to the physical input dedicated to the physical output of the device, because you could have a microphone that goes to two different PC, or to a Mac and to a backup system that's a PC, or vice versa. So we have a hard time explaining sometimes to users what is ANEMAN, but it's your main virtual patch that can tell you everything about the status of your device, and that can support different, not only merging devices necessarily. Eventually, we have more things coming up, and of course, we keep evolving with it. But see it like that is kind of a good way to start with. I hope I did not confuse you more, but it's like
Good. Now let's go into the functionalities of it. I'm gonna close this quickly and I'm gonna open and bring over my window of my Azure connection. So basically, obviously I downloaded the driver or the installer here. Just to be clear, I'm showing the Azure side on the Windows side, and Ricardo is showing on the Mac side and the core audio side. So on the Windows Azure side, I downloaded the executable from the website. I installed it, straightforward, click next, 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 and it's done, reboot, and then it's here. And the first thing is that obviously here I have to select what is called the local adapter. Basically, what is the physical network card or adapter I have? I'm on a laptop, so I have a USB-C to Ethernet connector adapter, and then I connect this guy over here. Okay, and you see the name of it, that it's connected, and that it has this IP address. I don't do anything about it. Huh? This is really all automatic on that aspect. Um, I can, of course, for more complex, bigger installation, set my IP address for all those devices, but we're not going to enter into those aspects here. If people are interested in understanding and going much further in the audio over IP type of functionalities, we have great webinars done by Nicolas Sturmel, who is our specialist about this, in French and English for beginners and for advanced people. Just look on our YouTube channel, you will find them. And he's done them a month and a half ago, and they're very good about this. Good. Then here we can choose the buffer size that we want our basically virtual sound card to have in that aspect. And there again, it depends the amount of data you want to carry through. But by default, it's 96 samples. Let's keep it like this. Perhaps Ricardo has something to add on this later on. But what is then very important is that we have here the latency, what we call the latency. It is basically that in the network, how can I say, architecture, each device has a latency to be able to work together. So that means that if now I have one big machine sending multi-channel, feeding multi-channel over the network, obviously some of those channels will take this path, some other ones this path, and so on and so on. So that basically the latency of all those packets going through the network arrive at the same time, so that we don't have different variation, that channel 23 is delayed compared to all the other channels, which you don't want to, obviously. So this is why we have to have a fixed latency, which is the same, I insist on that, on all the devices. So if one you put here in AS67, which is either 6, 12, or 48 samples, and you put other devices here in 16, 32, 64, this will not work. So you either have to decide to go onto AS67, like here, or to go onto the other one, which is actually the Ravenna. Now, the thing is that, again, once you install it, this comes by default. I kept my driver with the default installation, so you don't have to think about it. The Anubis as well is by default in AES67. So once you put it out of the box, you install it, it's there, so you don't think about it. But you can change it. This is basically for advanced applications that you can fiddle around if you wish to. But for the basic point-to-point or basic network, you just put it straightforward the way it comes installed. And then here, what we're talking about it, these are the numbers of channels. So obviously I can go in one FS up to 128, uh, each time by 8 channels, and the same thing for the outputs. And obviously you have here the indication of how this behaves when you go higher in sample rates. Obviously, if I go now to 104, so I will be able to record or input 13 DSD channels or PCM 8 times, so 384 kilohertz on that aspect. And then you have your status running. So this is saying running. It's in 48 kilohertz because in my workstation I set it up to be 48 kilohertz. If it would be 96, it would be 96, and so on. And the status is running. It means everybody is happy and it works. Obviously, if it's red here, it will say it will give me a message that something is not functioning. Perhaps my workstation is not up and running, or physically my device is not connected. So this once it's done, it's happy, and it's all fine. One perhaps important thing you see here on the top right, you see the version and the build number. So in case with our support, you need to communicate because you think something is not functioning or whatever, please refer to this number so that our support knows exactly which version you have. And in case you encounter perhaps an issue, they can refer to, oh, actually that has been solved in the next version, or it's not an issue, it's just a setting or whatever it is, but it's much easier for our support to know which version you talk about. Great. I think I talked about the ASIO. Ricardo, I make you a bigger window so that you can share your screen.
I'll just
Oh,
say
sorry.
a quick word on the ASIO. Uh, it's very important to have a 1 gigabit network interface. The buffer size, as you say, it can vary between people's work, but we have a tendency to like pretty low buffer size. But if I have an Anubis, I would probably use like 256 or something like that. But of course, it depends of your workflow and the project. If you're in mixing situation, if you're in recording situation, you must, well, you probably all know that the Anubis has a built-in mixer, ultra low latency, so you can always have the fallback monitoring for the musician, the artist, that is in ultra low latency. Despite of the buffering, you can have directly the input monitored with the summation of the DAW. So anyway, so and the rest of the parameters, of course, as depends of the IO count you will do. That's it.
Okay.
So if I kick in directly and just go on the
Yes, please. I just make your window a bit bigger.
oh yeah, I'll hide all this.
Don't show your
So
private stuff.
I'm nothing private. It's all merging stuff, but it basically we have the VAD that's available in download. Actually, we have two flavor for the VAD. A standard version that can be used with non-merging devices, but that are AES67 compliant devices, and we have the same version that's in premium available for free for users that have emerging device. So basically, if you have emerging device, we unlock things and we can guarantee more performance and more features, more IOs and greater specification. So the panel is here very quickly. You have the interface that you selected. I must say something quickly on the interface. We noticed that the recent Macs are 10 gigabits interface, and we have currently not this support for the Ravenna VAD. So I warn user to really check the network interface they have, and if there's a problem, you can get a small adapter, USB-C or Thunderbolt, or and connect it on your Mac, and still use the VAD with a recent Mac, of course. Then we have the latency. If you have the standard, you will be only available in 48. So it's like basically the standard for ES67. And then otherwise, we have greater and smaller latency here. Frequency with the standard, which is non-merging devices, you will be locked to 48, but we can do all the way to DSD, DOP. So if you have an Anubis Pro, you will go to 192, of course. And if you have a premium, you can consider doing DSD 256 and use, like, if you capture recordings and stuff like that, you can use a vinyl record, and there's other application you can use that do DSD on the Mac. The IO count depends also of the version you have. With the standard, we can go all the way to we can go to 8, and the non-standard we can go to the premium 128. Then we have the status of the driver here. The PTP is locked. Actually, if you happen to have a 10 gigabit interface, you might see the PTP not able to lock. That's a symptom we know about. So, and then here you have basically the discovery part. So I can click on my Anubis, and on my Anubis I can have the remote control of the Anubis here. So without going to the Anubis physically, I can decide what I monitor, and I also have here the preamps control remotely from the web browser of the Anubis. So we have that here. So basically, that's the panel. I can launch ANEMAN. I have it open here. Now I have I have stuff in development, so you see Mixer stuff and stuff like that. But basically, I make sure I connect my DAW correctly to the core audio, and I connect as well the inputs I want to use. As now I'm using it with like voice. But actually, I've renamed in Anubis my physical input. So my voice, my guitar, my bass, my percussion. So this is my 4 Anubis input that I connected here. So basically, quick overview here, and then I can launch the DAW of my choice. I will do Reaper now because it's right there. Let it launch. And you could use Logic, you could use Pro Tools, you can use also hi-fi players depending on what you do and stuff like that. So basically, we support all those applications. We like the evaluation here. So here you see I have my Anubis, my preamp that's coming in right here. So I can immediately start to record here as long as I've selected in the devices of Reaper that I'm using. Actually, I did the setup aggregate for a test early on. So actually, I'm using the aggregation because I was testing here the Pro Tools, not the Pro Tools, the Soundflower that allows me to record back the YouTube signal in the application here. So basically, it's a special testing config here as we test all the time. But you can see that I still have my inputs coming in. With Pro Tools, I have the remote preamps, the Mic Pre Avid based on the protocol Avid Pre. So we can control the remote of the Anubis preamps from the Pro Tools track header. In Reaper, you will have to use, like I showed you just briefly before, you can control the preamps inputs here. So if I cut or if I mute, you see I cutted my microphone here. That's grouped with the bass, but if I uncut just the microphone here, stuff like that. So with Reaper, I can immediately control my preamps also remotely from the web access. And that's pretty much it. So I connect the DAW to the output, and on Anubis I select the DAW, and I'm up and running. So I it's not too complicated. The new thing for many will be just to understand that they need to connect the IOs in ANEMAN, and be sure to, as we say all the time, to make sure that you have. We recommend that if my latency is 64 here, by example, it's better to have 64 low latency on the Anubis side, by example. So I think that's it.
Okay, so let me just, thank you, Ricardo. Let me just move this back here. And I just want to show two things. The first one being So let me just, sorry, arrange the screens. That takes always a bit of time. There we go. And move you back like this. And I gonna open ANEMAN on my side now because I prepared it as it is completely fresh, so to say, a default install, and so that you can see how it looks like on that aspect. So ANEMAN basically um, here, this is how it would look like, and you have three windows. This is basically my view window of the different devices. And you see here my computer with my virtual sound card, this time in PC, and I'm back on the Windows side here, and my Anubis. And first of all, you see here, I use the mouse wheel to go in and out. And you see here the little watch there, the Swiss train watch, which is basically telling me that this guy is my PTP master. So he's providing the clock for the moment to everything what is on there. And if I leave my mouse there, it gives me also some information, the serial number, the version of the firmware, and so on. This is, I mean, interesting for advanced functionalities, but for the basic point-to-point, you don't really care about this. Now, when I select one of this guy, or when I select both of these guys, you will see on the right side that they show the in and the outputs. I'm gonna come into this in 1 second. Just before, down here, I have a list of those devices, the same way as they're represented here, but just in a list, and I can have different informations that are shown up on the right side of that. Of course, if you don't like it, you just close this guy and you don't have it anymore. You do it the way you want. Now, the first thing you see here, if I zoom there, you have a world and you have a pin. Basically, this is what we call the world view and the pin view. So when you're going to use devices all the time, you can take them and you just move them up. So it will remember its connections. The time you switch them off, you switch them on, and so on, due to several days, you don't want to make those reconnections each time. So you move them in the pin view, and now it's going to remember its connections. And I'm going to do a few. First of all, here, so basically these are the outputs and those are the inputs. We have here some already made connections. And those are basically, this is basically the patch within the Anubis. Because as I have in and outputs in the Anubis, and I want to connect physically for the moment, for example, what I call my main outputs for the monitoring, for example, physically to my XLR1 and 2. So this is what is connected here, for example. My main output is physically connected to my XLR output, and so on and so on. So I could disable them, I could change them if I want. For the moment, I leave it the way it is, and I could then change it when I start to get more accustomed. But what is very important to me is that my Anubis comes with sources by default, so the make inputs, the instrument input, and one called DAW and one called stream. So the DAW is 2 tracks, and obviously that would be the stereo output of my DAW that I want to hear. And now I say here ASIO output 1 and 2, and obviously you see that now it turns green. So if I'm in areas that I'm not allowed to connect, it's red. Why I'm not allowed to connect this? Because it's taken already by somebody else. This is why it's red. It says here, you see there where my mouse is suddenly, it says output is already receiving something. Great. If I go here now, this is green, and I can make a connection. And I can make a second connection there. And once this is done, I just have to apply it, multicast or unicast. To make it a very clear, basic understanding between multicasting and unicasting something, is that I have a microphone on the stage, and if I wish to record this microphone in 2 workstations, I have to multicast it, because it's gonna not bring it only to workstation 1, but also to multiple other workstations, 2, 3, and so on, which is great, redundancy and all of that, but it eats up some bandwidth on the network. So this is then a scaling issue. If I use unicast, it will only bring it to the workstation I decide, for example, workstation 1, but workstation 2 and 3 will not be able to get the signal because it's a unique connection on that aspect. So you decide either the purple color or the dark blue color, and it will make my connection. And now my connection is done, and I can work with it. And as soon as I will select the source in my device, I can also double click here and it will open my web browser, which opens on the other screen. So I will bring it back to this screen here so that you can see it. Now it shows my, let me just make it a bit smaller. So double clicking on the device opens also my web browser, my web app, as Ricardo was mentioning it before. And now I can choose my main output. I remove the sun. I choose DAW and I can listen to my DAW playing back my stuff straight away. Well, I'm not playing anything, but I can, and there we go. Okay, so we'll see it move, and this is how I made this basic connection. This basic connection has been done for my outputs over here, and obviously I can do the same with my inputs. Now the other way around, these are the inputs of my workstation, and these are the feeds coming, for example, from my combo input 1 and 2 of the XLR back on the Anubis. So this is basically what ANEMAN is about. Then you can go much further, but let's keep it simple for now. And that was the explanation. I just want to go.
Thank you for covering more in details this, that the same applies to the VAD users with ANEMAN. So you went more in the details, but you will just see the core audio listed, the VAD listed instead of the ASIO here for the Mac side, but it's the same principle. Thank you.
You're welcome. So just to finish, very quickly, this is something new coming. As for Mac users, you are certainly familiar with the fact of using the aggregation of different devices or different virtual sound cards that are connected. And as Ricardo was kind of saying or explaining it in Reaper before, he could record the YouTube coming from the computer and at the same time the core audio and all of that. This is because the OS, the architecture of the OS in the Mac world, includes the core audio driver with the aggregation possibility of different drivers. And this in the PC world doesn't exist. And for people that would like for applications, various applications, for doing the same, recording a YouTube feed, for example, but also for gaming or for other possibility, would like to use the VDM driver. So this is then the so to say certified or natural driver of Windows, the Windows, what does it stand for already? Windows Driver Media or something like that? I don't remember. WDM, whatever, who cares? WDM driver.
Windows, I have no
And
idea.
and and at the same time to have multiple ASIO drivers because for the moment ASIO is unique to one connection. So what we created now is a new driver that is here that will give the possibility at the same time to connect the ASIO as we're used to an Anubis, for example, but at the same time to interconnect some VDM in and outputs, for example, a YouTube, because what we are doing now, for example, using the Anubis, I'm using here a little microphone on my headset. Ricardo is using the little microphone on his headset as well. If we would like to use, for example, our Anubis connected to a proper micro, a professional microphone, and then fed into my this YouTube broadcast, I could use this driver doing that, and at the same time having the workstation playing back professionally, even high sample rate if I would like to. So this gives a huge amount of possibilities using this driver in the future. This is still new, it is still on the beta, but it will come very soon to you, and you will be informed when it's available and how it will be available to you. Ricardo, you want to add something to that?
Well, indeed, it's in beta. We're right into this new device. And as you say, it's basically to provide new features and new workflow possibilities for well, we especially we're targeting the Anubis user studio home project monitoring. So you can with this record your Spotify feed in the DAW of your choice, and at the same time in parallel have another ISO device running, and you could well, a typical example is you use your DAW and you want to check a mastering or a snare sound that you really like. It's on your laptop. You just double click the snare sound or the mastering you did or somebody did, and you can compare quickly and monitor it all with the Anubis and basically record back, play guitar over YouTube, record back in a DAW, use denoiser application at the same time running in parallel with your DAW and stuff like that. So basically, it's a very good thing. And as Merging is one of the few companies that develops its own drivers, and we don't have third-party alliance for that, uh, we can evolve and we can guarantee a good support. Voilà.
Great. And as you can see, the functionalities on the driver side are the same as the one that we've seen for the Mac and the Windows, basically the buffer, numbers of channels, etc. And of course, it brings then the bridges and all of that on the top of it. Good. I think we discussed everything we wanted to discuss. Ricardo, you want to add something, or we say bye bye?
I think it's fine. It's fine for me. People should know that if they want to go more into details for some of the points we've talked about, there are tutorials on the first on the ANEMAN by example connections and stuff like that. You did some, Maurice, and we have some done by Dominic also. So people can refer to that if they want more detail. And there's also our knowledge database that's been online and well maintained by David and our people at Merging. So it's worth checking with this before contacting support. You should check the knowledge database before contacting support and Jordi, and if there's anything, then you can let us know.
Yeah. Thank you. This was just really to show you that then we went a bit more in the complexity of the network, but the basics point-to-point connection of the Anubis is very straightforward. You have a cable, network cable, driver that you install either on a Mac and a PC, the ANEMAN if you want to make some patch connection, and that's it, and you go. So very straightforward. Have a great day, and see you for the next time.
See you later, Maurice, and thanks
Yes.
to and there's also our sales partners that are there to help you in the region of you where you are staying. So thanks you. Bye bye. Talk
Bye
later.
bye. Thanks.
Ciao.
Bye.